Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Christine Dixon of The Ordinary Sacred, and this is the next video in my series about my own inner work using internal family systems. And this one is going to be about a big part of me, which is the thinking part. But before I begin, as always, I want to give two quick disclaimers. One is that this is my experience, and it's not meant to be prescriptive for you. So if your experience looks different than mine, that's okay. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. And I hope it's just inspiring to you to get curious about your own system and your own inner family. And the second thing is that sometimes I may be approaching a part and I am already in self, which means that I'm already feeling open and curious and compassionate and confident and creative as I approach the part. But there may be a step before that of meeting the concerns of parts who aren't feeling that way. Maybe they're feeling frustrated with the part you're trying to get to know, or they're afraid. And you'll actually see in this piece of work that there's a few times when other parts come in and I address them and their concerns before moving on. So you'll notice that in this one. All right. So what was so interesting about my thinking part was that it was so blended with me so much of the time that I was not really even aware of it or didn't really get to know it until I had been using IFS on my own system for about a year. And what happened was Dick Schwartz, the founder of IFS, has this beautiful meditation called the path, where you kind of imagine your different parts at the head of the path, and you as the self kind of meet their concerns until they will allow you to go up the path on your own as the self. And if one of them pulls you back, you work with that one. And the brilliance of this meditation actually is you may not ever really get on the path, but you become very aware of the parts that need your attention. And so you can work with them. Very rarely would I get very far on the path. Sometimes I would, but in this instance, I had worked with lots of parts and I was halfway up the path. I was really moving along with the path. And then I realized that there was a part in me that was analyzing everything. It was naming everything, analyzing everything, making sense of everything that I was seeing or experiencing on this path. And it's just a visualization, like I'm on a trail type of thing. But there was this part that kept making commentary about everything. And I noticed, and I said, can you give me space? And what happened in the visualization was that from my body walked out, just like it was coming from my body, this very tall, thin, kind of nerdy looking man. And I asked what his name was, and he said Sven. And this was the first time I stood in front of my thinking part. And from that point on, I would address Sven. He was with me all the time, and it was really wonderful to have a relationship with him because I could ask him, can you give me space to go toward parts and really receive from them? And he began to learn that if he did that, then he would have so much more to think about and analyze and fix and figure out with the information that I gained from the parts. So I developed a relationship with him, but I had never really gotten to know maybe what he protected and his history and more of that. So not too long ago, I decided to intentionally go in and get to know Sven a little bit more. Okay, so this is the session that I had getting to know Sven. What I often say is I'll just invite a part in. So I just said, hi, Sven, can you show yourself to me? And because I'm visual, I often will see in my mind's eye that part in front of me. You may not have that. You may just sense it somewhere in or around your body, or have some sense of its energy. So for me, I saw a tall, thin, nerdy man. Same image came to me. He had these glasses and kind of this quizzical look on his face. And I said, hi, Sven, is there anything that you want me to know about you? And this is a big question I like to ask my parts. It's just very open-ended, and then I'm able to just receive from them whatever they want me to know. And he said, I'm the one that figures things out for you. I like to predict, analyze, and solve. And so I said, yes, I know that you do that, and I appreciate you for that. And I said, do you have parts that you're protecting? Felt really curious about that. And he said, oh, yes, lots of parts. And so I asked him, what are you afraid would happen if you stopped doing your job? And his response was, I don't know what would happen. I don't know anything different to do. So this can be a common response from parts. Like, this is just what I do. I think, I analyze, I fix. So I asked him, do you ever feel burdened or urgent in what you're doing? Because parts are not always necessarily burdened, right? They might just be supportive to our system and our bodies on this planet. So I was just curious if he ever felt burdened. And when a part is burdened, it feels a sense of angst or urgency. So I asked him that. And he said, yes, sometimes, but not as much now that I know you. I do trust you. And so this was a sweet moment because I had a lot of interaction with him in kind of real time, and that he was expressing that he did trust me. I think when parts do trust the self, they do relax a lot more. But I asked him, in what kinds of circumstances do you feel burdened? And he said, when there's a threat or there's something that's unknown. And he said, but I've learned to trust you more and rest in the unknown. I know that things go better when I let you lead. So again, it's this testament of this relationship that I had built with him. So I told him, thank you. I'm so glad to have a relationship with you. But I'm curious, what do you think is a threat? Like, in those moments when you feel like there's a threat, what do you do? And he said, I look at all the angles and I research and I fill in the holes and I desperately try to find a way to fix it. And so I said, oh yeah, that makes sense. I know you sometimes work really, really hard. I said, what is your biggest fear? And Sven said that I won't know what to do and I won't be able to figure things out quick enough, and then there will be consequences. So again, this just led to natural curiosity. Well, what are the consequences? And he said, pain and suffering. I said, yeah, that makes sense. And I asked him, did this ever happen in the past where you were out of control or you didn't figure things out quick enough and then it resulted in pain and suffering? And then he said very matter-of-factly, 3 names. He said, Paul, Carl, Ronald, which were myself understood very quickly what that meant, that there were these 3 people that I had trauma incidences with. So what he said to me made sense to me completely. I said, oh yes, I see. And since he gave names of 3 people, I asked him, is your job to mainly try to control or fix other people? And he said, no, not necessarily. He said, I also worked very hard when you had your illness, right? Which wasn't another person, but it was an unknown, a threat. He said, I am trying to grasp control of every bit that I can in hopes that it will counterbalance what I do not have control over, which is always other people. So it seems like he understands that he can't control other people, but he's trying to do everything in his power, which is to figure out, what's the solution, what's the problem. And so I said, I appreciate your efforts so much. And I genuinely asked, is your strategy effective? And he kind of like slumped his shoulders and he said, when other people are involved, no, I feel very helpless. And I, at that point, felt a lot of compassion for him. He seemed kind of defeated and sad. And I said, yeah, that must feel really overwhelming to feel helpless. He said, yeah, sometimes I feel like giving up. And I said, well, I'm here to help you. I said, is it okay if I go to those parts that might be stuck in the trauma with those 3 different people? And he said, yes, please. And he sat down. So since I got his permission, I decided to start with the first one. The first name was Paul. And I knew that the trauma with that was when I was 14 years old. So I asked that 14-year-old to show herself to me. And she did. She immediately was there in a black shirt and plaid pants with her hair half up. She's 14. And I just expressed to her that I was happy to see her. And she seemed to be fairly trusting of me. Again, sometimes there can be work that needs to be done there to gain trust of an exile, but she seemed trusting of me. So I asked her what she wanted me to know. And she began what's called the witnessing stage in IFS, where she started showing me the things she wanted me to understand. So she showed me 3 different scenes. One was sitting in the mental hospital when her boyfriend, Paul, had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And she was showing me very clearly that she felt shock, helplessness, confusion, and extreme fear. And then she showed me when she had to break up with him and on her bed that night crying, and that she felt such heartache, but she really felt deeply guilty, like she was responsible for him and she had let him down. And then she also showed me some scenes where she had been at church or at home, and Paul had sent her these letters letting her know basically that he had been watching her. And so he was essentially stalking her. And so she felt a lot of fear about that as well. So there are lots of different things around that where she didn't have any control and she felt a lot of fear. So right then, Sven kind of popped out. He was apparently watching from the side. He popped out from the side and he said, yeah, this was the point where I came in and obsessively started researching about schizophrenia. So there was this unknown scary thing, this diagnosis. And I remember just this part taking me over and obsessively researching. And at the time, this was dating myself here. This was before the internet. And so I would go to the library and check out books and look up articles in the microfiche and just was obsessed with understanding everything I could about schizophrenia, because the main fear was that I would get it. And the part will say that later, but so I did what I call time travel. It's not a word that they use in IFS, but it's just my current adult self intentionally went to that first moment in the hospital, in the mental hospital. And I saw the 14-year-old girl sitting at the table. And she looked at me and she said, "This feels like a prison. It's like hell in here." And I could really sense her deep discomfort and fear. And she explained to me that she was afraid of the medications and she was afraid of the nurses who were treating Paul like he was an animal. And then what was fascinating was she showed me this, what I now call an aversion response in her body, that she was feeling this deep discomfort, disgust kind of feeling in her body. And so I explained to her, this is your body compass. This is telling you that something's wrong, or something's unsafe. And she said, "This doesn't seem okay, but I don't know any alternative. So I'm just left to trust the authorities." But you could tell she had this battle. This is a common thing in a lot of my parts, between what her gut was telling her and what kind of the authorities were telling her, this internal, external authority battle. And then that's when she told me that she had a huge fear of herself going crazy and ending up in a place like this, she said, and being locked up. So I sat with her and I just kind of told her it's okay to listen to your gut instinct. Your body is telling you that something's not okay here. And it's okay for you to trust that internal authority over the external authorities. And she just kind of took it in and she said, yeah, she said, I don't think they're getting at the roots. Paul's difficulty actually makes sense. He's not crazy. He's just had trauma. He needs love, not meds, is what she said. Because the place was just so cold and so it wasn't treating the clients like humans, right? Okay, so then I said to the 14-year-old, because I also sensed this deep burden of responsibility that she felt responsible for him. So I said, do you know that you're not responsible for saving him? And that it's okay for you to care for yourself and to let his capital S self care for him. And she just kind of like pondered that for a while. And she kind of took it in. And I said, what do you want to do? So is there anything you want me to do with or for you back here? And she said she just wanted to get out of there. She said, I want to get out of here and never come back. So I grabbed her hands and I said, let's go. And we just started running. We ran through the hospital and out into the parking lot. And I said, where do you want to go? And she said, I want to go somewhere open and safe and in nature. And we ended up at the park across the street from my current house. And she kind of just looked around to see if it was safe. And then she sat down on the swing, kind of out of breath, but a little more relaxed. And this was fascinating. So this is when a sleepy part suddenly came in. A lot of people ask me, like, how do you know that it's a sleepy part and you're not just tired? It was because I was not tired. Sometimes you fall asleep because your body's tired, of course. But sometimes when you're doing this work, there can be a dissociative part, a confused part, or a sleepy part that will come in and stop the work. So I just felt like I was dozing off. And so I turned toward the sleepy part at this point, and I just said, can you just give me a little space so that I can be with the 14-year-old? And it did for a little bit. And I went back to the 14-year-old and I said, where do you carry the burdens that you got back there at the mental hospital? And she said, she showed me her back and her arms, and that I realized she was pointing to this heavy backpack that she was carrying, and that represented her sense of responsibility and helplessness about the situation. And then she showed me that her intense fear of going crazy was in her throat and in her head, and it looked like this black tar. So I asked her, are you ready to release those from your system? You can give them to one of the elements if you'd like. And so she said yes, she wanted to drop the backpack off of a cliff. So we went to a cliff and she took the backpack off and she just dropped it and watched it fall. And she felt much lighter and more free. But then at this point, again, that sleepy part came on really, really strong. I felt like I couldn't keep my eyes open. So I turned toward it and just asked it, what are you afraid would happen if I kept working with this girl? And it said, it's too much to unburden all the parts around Paul and Carl and Ronald. It's just too much. There's so much there. And that's when I realized, oh, it's so fascinating that these parts don't know what I'm thinking as the self, right? Because so I told them, I'm just wanting to finish this piece of work with the 14-year-old. I'm not going to do everything around, not even everything around Paul, and I'm not even going to begin today doing everything with Carl and with Ronald. So if you will just give me a little bit of space to just finish this, then we'll rest. And it was amazing. The part just immediately left and I felt wide awake for the remainder of the time. So I went back to the 14-year-old and she said she wanted to wash the fear that was represented by tar in her head and her throat away. And we went to a waterfall and just let it wash out of her and watched it go down the stream. And we both breathed deeply, and she just felt so much freer. And my observation of her was that she was more pure, light, happy, bright-eyed, innocent, clear-minded. She had a lot more security. And I asked her directly, what new quality or qualities would you like to invite into your body now that you don't have to carry that responsibility and that fear? And she said, freedom. Put her hand up and just started running around. And then at that point, I brought her back to, in my mind's eye, I have this beautiful cabin in Tuolumne Meadows. And I took her back there. That's where all my inner family lives. And the first thing she wanted to do was take a nap. So she took a nap. And then when she got up, she wanted to take a little hike to the spring. And we did that. And she was just enjoying herself. And that was the point that I called Sven back in and asked him if he saw what I had done with the 14-year-old and how he felt about it. And he just smiled and gave me a hug. And he said, I believe in you. I do. I already do. I knew you could help her. And then he looked at me and he said, thank you so much for seeing me. Because this is the first time I really asked about him. And to be honest, he was protecting a lot. Like he said, he was right? There's a lot of trauma around those three people. And it makes sense that in order to protect me, he pulled me into my head. If I can just figure things out, I can save you, from all these different things. So I just am so appreciative to that part. And I love that he trusts me and he gives me space to do this work, because it really is on account of him giving me space often that I'm able to hear from parts. So having a good relationship with your thinking part is really valuable in doing this work. So I encourage you to get to know your own thinking, analyzing parts if they're burdened, which I think is true for a lot of us. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.